My earliest memory is playing under a quilt that my grandma and her friends were quilting on. And I was maybe about 4. and that was my first memory. As I got older, of course, I didn't have any contact with Relief Society because that was for old women, and I wasn't involved in that at all.
Well, I'm a convert, and when I was baptized into the church, I was married and had 1 child. We've been married about 4 years, and I was just pregnant with the 2nd child. And the Relief Society president came to visit me and invited me to Relief Society. And I remember asking my husband, what is Relief Society? Because he was the one who had been a member. And he said, oh, I don't know, these old ladies go and they do things, and he had no good memory of it. So I took the challenge that I would go to Relief Society, and this lady offered to pick me up, and I said, I'll drive, thinking, if I don't like it, I can leave. And so that was my first memory.
Tell me first what your earliest memory of Relief Society is.
Oh, gee. I was a little girl, and our neighbor was Relief Society president, and she talked about Relief Society a lot. And I remember playing Relief Society with my little neighbor friends, and not that we knew much about it. I think one of the girls did. Her mother was president, and she'd direct the rest of us on what we should do. But so I was really young. I've always known about Relief Society.
How would you play Relief Society? What would you do?
One would be in charge, and they would say, you need to go see Sister Brown today. She had a baby. Things like that. I mean, they knew about Relief Society, and I did too, of course.
Oh, at the New York World's Fair, we were walking down the mall or whatever it was called, and suddenly there was a cloud burst, and the closest building that we were to was on our right side, and we ran in there, and it was the Mormon Pavilion. And we had known of one person that was a Mormon, but we had never known more than that person. And so we had the whole tour, guided tour with the film and statues and lovely wall posters and things. And as we were getting ready to leave, there was this booklet you were supposed to sign your name and what you thought about it. And so I wrote a few sentences. I didn't think they were that spectacular, but 2 weeks to the very day that we were there, knock, knock on our door in Pelham, New Hampshire, were 2 missionaries. And I was very surprised. And so I invited them to come back, not that evening, but next evening, because then my husband would be home and the children would be there too. That started it all.
My earliest memory of Relief Society would have to be when my mother was secretary to the Tabor Relief Society. There was only one warden those days, and she had a little black box about so by so and about that deep, and it had a red star on top of it. And that's where she kept the Relief Society money. And sometimes Vivian and I, my older sister and I, would get to carry that box to church with us, to Relief Society, because we didn't have babysitters in those days, or few and far between. And so that's my earliest memory of Relief Society. We would get to sit there by the ladies, but we couldn't say anything. Seen but not heard.
Basically, when we lived here in Mapleton the first time, and I remember Bonnie Jividan. She was my visiting teacher, and she came to visit with me, and we became good friends. And I remember we had 4 acres at the time, and I remember that one of the days that our basement was being flooded, and she came over and helped me do what I needed to do because Meryl was out of town. And the girls, Debbie and Karen, slept downstairs, and they had to wear their boots, their rain boots, to get in and out of bed. And they did. And they'd lay down there and talk and giggle and so on and so forth. It was no big deal to them. They thought it was fun. And then, of course, the water was gone after that. But Bonnie was just one of those people that just seemed to always be there when I needed her.
I can remember the little lady that was in charge of quilting, and she was always complaining that people were making too big stitches in her quilt, and I vowed I would never quilt because she frightened me so. And I remember another lady that we became acquainted with later, and she was a beautician, and she used to say, I sit in the back of the room and I mentally do ladies' hairs over in my mind. So I learned to never sit in front of her.
Well, one thing that I learned, and I still do not do well, is quilting. Because all the Relief Society sisters that are born in the church are good quilters. I made one quilt for each of our 2 children, and that's the only thing I ever did because I did not like it that much, and I was not that talented. So that was the end of that.
I was born in Tabor, Alberta. I was born at home. Sister Pearson was mother's midwife when I was born. And we were happy as we could be. We didn't know that we had less than somebody else had. We didn't have much income. And we lived in a 2-room house with a privy down, I don't know how far, 100 yards from the house. And we had horses. My dad had a team of horses. We had a cow. We had pigs. And anyway, this 2-room house housed 5 children and Mom and Dad. And we had cold running water. We did not have hot running water. One time Mom was so distraught, she didn't know what to have for dinner, and so she had us pick some pigweed, and she hoped that it would taste like spinach when we put salt and pepper and butter on it. But trust me, it didn't taste like spinach, because I liked spinach, but I didn't like pigweed. I don't think any of us ate it. Dad wasn't home, so.
When I was about 5 or 6 and started roller skating on the sidewalk on our street, if I fell down and really scraped my knee, I'd dash home and my mother would clean it off and be loving me the whole time with comments and things. And then she'd put some ointment on it and a Band-Aid, but a big bandage. They weren't Band-Aids like we have now. And then at night, she was afraid that the smaller bandage would come off and the sheet would stick to it, and then that would be painful. So she took a mayonnaise jar cover and put it over the scrape and taped that down to hold it from moving around or falling off. And when I woke up in the morning, it would still be there, and my knee felt a lot better.
Well, I think most of what I know did come from my family. They were, homemaking was their life. They loved being in charge of their house and cooking and cleaning, and my mother was so happy when she could house clean. And I mean house clean. Everything goes outside, and you vacuum the springs, the ones they used to have. It was a horrible time for me. I hated house cleaning day, but
Oh, I loved it. After I learned how, which just came naturally to me, our neighbors would clean up the place that they had to grow a garden. It was quite a big garden, and in the wintertime they would flood that. And when it was frozen, those of us who had skates would go over there and skate. I didn't have any. Mom said I could use hers if I wanted. And I remember them being quite long, black, and lace up. And so I would stuff the toes with old socks and go over to Harding's to skate. And I could skate the first time I tried. It was so fun.
What's the greatest challenge that you've had to overcome in your life?
Well, obviously speech, but and I had all kinds of speech therapy and everything, and I have never had normal speech. I've always been a stutterer because I remember thinking that I was going to kindergarten and I was all pumped up because maybe they can teach me how to speak normally. So I had it for a long time. And I had all kinds of speech therapy, and it kind of helped, just a little bit. But the best therapy I ever had came not from a speech therapist, but from a psychologist that they had come and talk to us. And he said, you guys will never ever be the lead actor on stage ever. But he said you can build scenery, and you can paint the scenery, and you can sing and dance in the chorus. That's what I did. And you can sell the tickets. And he said, this is the law of compensation, that you do everything you can. Let's see, how did he say it? You pick what you want to do, and you do everything you can in that area. And so that's what I would tell anybody that had any kind of a handicap, to get the best help that you can, and then get as close to normal as possible, and then go ahead and do what you want to do. And don't let it ever become a handicap. Do as much as you can that you want, however you can. And don't ever be a victim. Don't ever be a victim. And I kind of haven't. There hasn't been much that I haven't been able to do, and I think it's this attitude. I think it is. And if that will help other people who have handicaps, and everybody has something. Everybody has something. And don't be a victim. Do not be a victim.
When I first went to Calgary, I worked as a teller in a bank. And Melvin Johnson, I think that was his name, came up to one of the dances that we were at. And I didn't know beforehand, but they were going to have a jitterbug contest. And so he was from Barnwell, which is just 5 miles from Tabor. So I knew him. And he asked me to dance. And we won the jitterbug contest. And I remember that they gave us a record or something like that for winning. And I didn't have a record player or anything, so I gave it to him. That was okay.
And when I got married and everything, it seems like we focused on crafts a lot. And I was in Southern California, and I don't know if you remember or if your mom ever made those acrylic balls. Okay, and I made a apes. I had them color coordinated to my home, and Jim had a fellow that he was talking to, and he asked Jim. He says, "Can I ask you a question?" And Jim said, "Sure." And he said, "What is the significance in your church of these acrylic balls? Because I see them in every LDS home." And Jim had to say, "It's a craft."
I was in the district. It was New Hampshire district, and I was in the Relief Society presidency, and we drove the four ladies. We drove all night long. We'd take turns. 2 women sleeping in the back and 2 in the front, talking to each other while the other was driving. And we stayed at the Hotel Utah, and we did so many wonderful things and heard so many wonderful speakers and general authorities spoke that we never had seen before. So that was really fulfilling. And I remember one year when we came, there was some kind of I don't remember what the presentation was, but it was in like an athletic field. And at the end, there was a lot of the young women, they did a dancing thing. And I don't remember the music, but it was fantastic. And it was just a super, super experience. Well worth driving all the way out and driving all the way back. And we talked about it for many times as we were returning back to New England. So that was a lot of fun.
And my one little boy, one day, I don't know what it was he wanted to do, but I was getting ready to go to Relief Society. And he looked at me with this defiant look on his little face, and he said, "Are we going to that stinking Relief Society again?" I'll never forget it. I really liked workday, and you could come and go as your time permitted. But there was always lunch that day, and it was just a great time for the sisters to visit and to do something worthwhile, because it was always some kind of project, maybe a family in need or whatever, but we always had work day. But it was still much the same, like testimony day, and the lessons. The feeling was always there, and I don't think that changed, at least not to me. Relief Society is just, it isn't 2 words to me, it's 1 word, and it just gives me a warm feeling.
Oh, Annis Murdoch, she was born into the church in Utah. In Utah, and then they lived in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Anyway, she was a fairly close neighbor, and she was my Relief Society visiting teaching partner for years. And I did learn so much from her, and whenever I had a question that I wasn't quite sure about, I would always talk to Annis about it, and we were really close friends and went to concerts together. And we had visiting teaching route. Sometimes it took us 2 hours to get to see a person and to get back home, and it took us 3 times a month to do our visiting teaching. And she was a great partner. I miss her greatly.
I think I was talking about this in Society. I was there in church, and I had 5 little kids, and I was trying to keep them quiet. And one of our sweet old Society sisters came and put her arm around me, and she said, "Nancy, you're doing a good job." And I cannot tell you what a boost that gave to me at a time when I needed it.
Up in Heber, we were just, I say up in Heber, but up in Charleston, there was an elderly woman. She was my visiting teaching companion, Mabel. She was a sweetheart. I remember one time Mabel called me and she says, "Bill's having a rough time. What do you think?" And I says, "Should we go up and visit with him?" So we went up to visit with him, and of course he was there alone, and his wife had already passed away, and we had been over to the hospital when she was so ill, and we sat there and cried with him. And then, anyway, Mabel and I went over and cleaned up his house and made his bed and changed the sheets and so on and so forth, but he was fun. And then I remember Mabel and I, they would go, her and her husband would go to St. George in the wintertime and work in the temple down there. And then they would come back in the summertime back to Charleston, and then we would just pick up right where we left off, so on and so forth. Anyway, somebody called and said that Mabel had had a stroke. And I says, "Okay, I'm on my way." And when I got there, the daughter-in-law that was there, and her daughters were there. And when I went in, I went over to Mabel, and they had just given her a shot to relieve a lot of the pain. And I went over and knelt by her, and I said, "This is calling. We've got our visiting teaching all done." And she raised up and gave me a kiss, and then died. That was hard.
John and Barbara had just finished lunch, and he'd been working this wood shop, and he said that they needed to go visit me. And Barbara said, we're going to make visits later this afternoon. She was really the society president. And John said, something tells me Wilma needs us now. So they left their house, drove to the hospital in Provo. I was not in my bed, I was in the bathroom. I'd asked the nurse if I could use the bathroom. She said, I'll walk you there. When you're ready to come back, pull a cord and someone will come and walk you to your bed. I called, hearing John, is anybody there? In his soft, sweet voice. And I said, oh, John, I'm in the bathroom, I'll be right out. I pulled the cord, and that's the last thing I remember. Because when they came to get me, I was on the floor, not breathing, and my heart had stopped. But I had pulled the cord. So the young a nurse, male nurse came, and he saw me there, so they said he ran to the door and called for another nurse to help. So she came, and they lifted me back to bed, and they rang a code blue. And the Pratt said people came from all over, the nurses, everybody. There happened to be a pulmonary doctor visiting in the next room. So he came and he took charge of the situation because they assumed it was my lungs that had gotten blood clots. Happens very often. I think about this a lot because John definitely followed the Spirit, and the Lord many times will have us listen to the Spirit because we are to help someone else, or we have a responsibility somehow. John and Barbara Pratt, in essence, saved my life. Because if they hadn't come at that time, I wouldn't have pulled the cord. And if I would have just collapsed without pulling the cord, 4 minutes and you're brain dead. So definitely, they saved my life.
And so I was in Relief Society, and we were talking about this was in about 82, okay, and we were talking about Ecclesiastes and how there is a time for everything, and how our lives are kind of divided up into sections, and the question was, what do you want to do in this coming section? I thought to myself, I want to play the cello. And of course, it wasn't as if I didn't have anything on. I had a kid in college. I had a couple of kids in high school, and a couple of kids in junior high, and one in elementary. I had a couple of church callings. I was working full time and taking call. At our age, you need to have something you love, and if you don't, you die. For my mom, it was writing. She loved that, and for me, it's been that.
Everything good I learned from them. You know, like good, happy attitude and being grateful and not complaining. I think that's something everybody needs to learn. You know, fix what you can fix, and then accept what you can't, and enjoy life. But sometimes it takes a lifetime to come to that realization. You know, I think it has taken me a long time. I loved all the jobs. That's why the church is so great. It affords you all these opportunities to grow and blossom and learn. I mean, but it's just part of the whole thing. And, you know, that's what always speaks to me. I know the church is true. Just because no matter where you go, it's there. And if you have the right spirit, you feel that spirit.
My sister and I, my older sister and I, were told to go and find the cow one evening, maybe about 5 o'clock anyway. It was just barely getting dark. And we thought we knew right where she was, but we went there and she wasn't there. So I said to Vivian, let's pray. And so we knelt down in that long grass and prayed that we would be able to find the cow. We got up and she was not 20 feet from us. And I'll never forget that. I knew that prayers were answered then if I hadn't known before. But I must have known before because I prayed that we'd find the cow.
Part of our calling as Relief Society, especially in this day and age where we have so many competing ideas and influences that are pulling us away from the gospel, is we can support each other. I think this is huge. I think I have a picture of us joining arms and marching forth, because that's kind of what it takes, because we are bombarded and our kids are bombarded with so much stuff that it's going to take us all. It's going to take us all.